and Representative Fine and others. CS for House Bill 1423, a bill to be entitled An Act Relating to the Protection of Children.
Representative Fine, you're recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that SB 1438, a companion measure, be substituted for CS for HB 1423 and that the Senate bill be read a second time by title.
Representative Fine moves that SB 1438 be substituted for CS for HB 1423 and that the Senate bill be read a second time by title. All in favor say yea. Yea. Opposed no. Show the motion is adopted. Read the Senate bill a second time by title.
By Senator Yarborough and others. Senate Bill 1438, a bill to be entitled An Act Relating to the Protection of Children.
Representative Fine, you're recognized to explain the Senate bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is evil in this world, and we face it here today. SB 1438 does something very simple. It protects children by defining adult live entertainment and saying that children under the 18 or younger cannot attend those performances either in private performances or in public performances. And while we did just hear in the back rows that we shouldn't ask people questions on things, I want you to know I'm happy to answer your questions. Good luck.
Are there questions of the sponsor? Questions of the sponsor. Representative Escamani in questions.
Thanks so much, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fine, in Florida statute, we already prohibit not only promoting, quote, obscene shows, exhibition, or performance by live persons before an audience. So what does your bill do that's not already prohibited under current law?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the bill has a couple hundred lines of things that we're going to do. It defines what is an adult live performance, which is not currently defined. It also says the penalties for private facilities who choose to allow minors in. And it also talks about penalties for public governments that choose to have these adult live performances which target children.
Escamani.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Is the purpose of what you just outlined to target drag shows because you believe they sexualize young people?
Representative Fine. I'm not sure that goes to the bill, but
it does not. The bill has a definition of what adult live entertainment is, and I don't think you will find those words in it.
Representative Escamani in questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do you consider drag shows to be in the definition of your bill?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reason, if I had wanted to do that, I'm not afraid to say what I think. And the reason we did not do that is you cannot say as a matter of course that two words equal something. That's why there's an approximately 20-line definition that has 4 separate tests. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to ask the question you wish you'd answered, not the one that you actually did, because as I said before, this bill doesn't specifically deal with drag shows, but the penalties in this bill are on those who admit the individual to the adult live performance. So I guess, well, conceivably, if the parent was the ticket taker, but in general, no, this is not intended to target parents. It is on those who admit the individual to the adult live performance.
Representative Escamani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do you believe that one of the consequences of your bill will be a chilling effect on specifically drag performances, or it can be burlesque shows as well, where we're having these harsh penalties being applied?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly hope it will have a chilling effect on adult live performances that target children.
Representative Escamani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What does target children mean?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say it is adult live performances that allow children to attend. Again, I would be clear, this bill has absolutely nothing to do with live performances put on by adults, which is 18 and up, for adults. Not only would I not vote for a bill that does that, I wouldn't sponsor one. This bill exclusively deals with performances of an adult nature that children are allowed to attend.
Representative Escamani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What if organs, which is currently not prohibited under Florida law, is this a direct response to the Plaza Live and the Hyatt Regency Miami having complaints by DVR?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't speak to the motivations of others for that language, but it was not my own.
Representative Escamani in questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Where did that language come from then?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My head.
Representative Escamani. Questions on the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So can you just explain why did you add it to the bill then?
Representative Fine, the motivations for adding that to the bill.
I'm going to save that for later. Because I thought it was a good idea.
Representative Escamani.
All right, thank you. Do you also think that there's such a thing as family-friendly drag shows?
Representative Fine.
I'll be honest. I don't know. It's not anything I would ever choose to take my child to, but that's why this bill specifically has this lengthy definition of what would be adult live entertainment.
Representative Escamani.
Thank you, Mr. This is my last one for now. So in Orlando and in my district, we have drag shows that are on the sidewalk. So they're ticketed when you purchase the dinner or the brunch, whatever, but they're on the sidewalk and folks walk by all the time. So how does your bill intersect with that type of private event that does require a ticket, but it's hosted in a public setting?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The beginning of the bill deals with the permitting of those types of events that will be of a public nature.
Representative Escamani.
I'm sorry, it's
Conduct or the lewd exposure of prosthetic or imitation genitals or breasts when it, 1, predominantly appeals to a prurient, shameful, or morbid interest, and, not or, and 2, is patently offensive to prevailing standards in the adult community of this state as a whole with respect to what is suitable material or conduct for the age of the child present, and 3, taken as a whole, is without serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for the age of the child present. I would argue that is a very high standard for a performance to have to meet.
2, the bill uses the word lewd and lewd conduct, but does not define those terms. What is the definition of lewd conduct?
Representative Fine, if it's defined in the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we're not taking up the House bill, if you can find that in your notes in the Senate bill, I'm happy to deal with that.
Representative Henson, if you want to take a moment, I can call on somebody else if you want to reference those lines or go on to another question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're recognized.
I just wondered, could he define lewd conduct? That might be in his head.
Representative, you just direct your question to the bill, and if there's if you have a question about how that's defined, we can ask him to answer that. But I believe the sponsor is asking whether that is actually exists in the Senate version.
Thank you for that explanation, Mr. Speaker. I'll move on to another question.
You're
If there were
recognized.
minors at such an event that we're discussing, would the venue that held the event be subject to criminal charges under this bill? And what about the chairperson who organized the event?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A venue that does this, let's just move to, let's just go to lines 64 to 76 of the bill. So a venue that did this would be issued a $5,000 fine for the establishment's first violation and a $10,000 fine for the second and subsequent violation. The individual who admitted the child would be subject to a misdemeanor.
Representative Henson, in questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question was to the chairperson organizing the event. Would they be charged?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, hearing can be sometimes difficult. I guess if the chairperson was the person who admitted the child to the event, they would be subject to it. I guess if the chairperson owned the venue where the event took place, they would be subject to receive the fine. But beyond that, this bill wouldn't have any effect on anyone else involved in such adult life performance.
Representative Henson, in questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to find the lines for lewd conduct, and I'll come back. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions of the sponsor. Representative Nixon.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. In lines 104 through 105, it states that in a if it predominantly appears.
Representative Henson, in questions.
And the definition is?
Representative Fine, was asked and answered.
No, it's fine. I mean, I think we all have these cool little things called laptops. You can type in Florida Statute 800.04 and 800.09 and read it for yourself.
Representative Chambliss, in questions. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fine, in Miami-Dade and other places, event called Carnival happens, and it is outside, and it is a cultural and to some even religious event that happens. Based on this bill, would that be considered an adult live performance?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't answer the question. I don't know, because that's why we don't put things like single words in there. If it meets the definition in lines 98 through 111 of this bill, then it would. If it doesn't, it wouldn't. I have no idea. But I would say, no matter what it does, and I have no idea, if it's just for adults, doesn't matter what they do under this bill.
Representative Chambliss, you have another question? Representative Harris, I saw next up. Representative Harris, you're recognized. One of you. Yes?
Thank you, Mr.
Harris, you're
Speaker.
recognized.
You mentioned the Miller test, but you also mentioned the prurient standards of the prevailing culture and what their opinions are. How is that defined in the bill?
I believe that's been asked and answered. Representative Fine, do you want to read that section of the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's defined as the Supreme Court of the United States defined it.
Representative Harris.
I'm not asking about the Miller test. I'm asking about the standards of the adults in the state. Who lays out those standards?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. I did not understand the question. It would be the finder of fact if this was something that moved forward. I would have to make those decisions. It would not be me.
Representative Harris.
I apologize for not thanking you the last time, so thank you twice, Mr. Speaker. So there is no definition of, there is no prevailing standard, but we're using a prevailing standard to decide what behavior is lewd. Is that correct? To make sure I'm clear, because sometimes I don't get things right away. So am I clear on that?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. Another member was trying to speak to me, so I did not hear the question. Would you please repeat it? I apologize.
Representative Harris. You're recognized.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. So I just want to be clear that the standards of the adult in the community at question are not clearly stated in this bill, and therefore we don't know what those standards will be and how it will be decided what is lewd or offensive behavior.
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't hear a question there, but if there is one, I'm happy to answer it.
Representative Henson, you want to repeat your question or rephrase your question? Sorry, Representative Harris, I'm sorry. You want to repeat your question?
Thank you, Mr. Thank you. How are we going to define that, Representative Fine? Who is going to determine what the prevailing feeling of the adults in a certain community decides what is lewd and offensive in a sexual way?
Mere act of that. I tried to say this before. You have to do this and this and this and this in order to qualify under this. And again, I would also reemphasize the fact there's absolutely nothing in this bill, nothing that affects live performances for those of people of the age of majority, which is 18 and up. Nothing.
Additional questions of the sponsor. Representative Eskamani, in questions.
Mr. Speaker, so my understanding is that you've taken the Miller test, but you've added more to it. You've changed it. What were the changes you made and why?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me get to my notes on that. We did make a few minor changes, and that is correct. Hold on. Sorry. Here we go. What we did is we used the average person, but what it does is it says instead of using a 3-year-old standard for all of this, it uses the standard of the age of the child present, which is different depending on how old you are.
Representative Eskamani, in questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to understand what you just shared with us, Rep. Fine. So if a 17-year-old went to a drag show, would that be okay Can you maybe just walk me through that?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've not only asked and answered that question, I've been asked and answered that question by you, which is drag show is not in this bill. This bill is a multi-state 20-line test of multiple things that have to be met in order to be considered an adult live entertainment.
Representative Escamani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So if a 17-year-old went to one of these adult live entertainments you're describing, would that be appropriate because they're 17?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Part of the definition of adult live entertainment, I'm flipping back to the bill just so I make sure I get it right. Part of the definition of the bill, when you're determining if something is adult live entertainment, is, again, this is one of the multiple tests.
Representative Escamani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So if I'm an event planner and I'm trying to figure out, what can I do with an event that I'm hosting, who do I go to for guidance on what the standards are for the state as a whole? Maybe I just moved to Florida, from another state. Who do I go to for that standard?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If your event is for people over the age of 18, not for children, you don't need to go to anybody.
Representative Escamani.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Speaker. What if it's not? What if I'm hosting, a party for 16, 17-year-olds?
Representative Fine. Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A bat mitzvah is not a performance of any kind. That said, you would read the definition. I mean, that's what we do when we have laws. We read them, we follow them, and we make decisions based on them.
Representative Escamani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My concern is that there is no definition. So how do you define community of this state as a whole to respect what is civil material conduct? How would you define that? What are some variables I should look at when trying to figure that out?
Representative Fine, with respect to what the bill says on that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think this question was asked and answered by another member. I understand the concern with this question, but I'm not on the Supreme Court. I did not create the Miller test. This is how they thought it was appropriate for obscenity to be defined, which is an even higher standard for what we have here in the bill.
Representative Escamani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is not true. You added that to the Miller test. Do any other states have that change to the Miller test? And can you give me examples of other states who've done the statewide standard, and how would they interpret it?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is not true. What we did is we changed from the local area to statewide, but the notion of the views of the community as a whole, that is the same as what is in the Miller test.
Representative Escamani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So have any other states in this country passed a bill that interprets the Miller test to be a statewide standard?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got no idea.
Additional questions of the sponsor? Seeing none, are there amendments?
On the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Read the first amendment.
Representative Nixon offered the following amendment with title amendment, barcode 962611. Between lines 41 and 42, insert an amendment.
Representative Nixon, you're recognized to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment simply creates a short title for the bill, which names it the homophobic and transphobic bill that seeks to create fake moral outrage and target and erase the LGBTQ+ community.
Are there questions? Thank you. Are there questions of the sponsor? Representative Fine, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for this well-considered amendment. Would you mind pointing out to me what in the bill, because I didn't have any name for it, what in the bill supports the notion of naming it this? I'd appreciate lines and quotes and words.
Representative Nixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is in regards to the chilling effect it's already having, in addition to the comments that you have made on social media.
Representative, if you would just confine your comments to the bill and not the member. Go ahead.
That's it.
Representative Fine, any questions?
Thank you. So I will ask the question for a second time, since we are apparently allowed to ask questions multiple times. Where in the bill, it's a 5-page bill, it's not that long, what in the bill do you use to justify the title that you have used here in your 3-line amendment? I would like to know, so we can debate you on it, what portions of the bill justifies the use of this title.
Representative Nixon.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. That question's been asked and answered, Mr. Fine.
Additional questions of the sponsor. Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I heard was comments about my social media, which is not subject to the bill, so I'm going to ask for a third time. The bill is, look, I'll make it easy. How about one? The bill is 106 lines long. Which of the 106 lines? Name one of the 106 lines that justifies, that you're using as the justification for this title.
Representative Fine, I think we've probably asked and answered that question. Additional questions of the sponsor. Additional questions. Seeing none, are there amendments to the amendment?
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Are there substitute amendments?
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Is there debate? Representative Masulo in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask the members to vote down this particular amendment. I think it has nothing to do with the bill, and quite frankly, I think it's somewhat insulting to the sponsor.
Additional debate. Representative Escamani in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, getting my steps in today. Members, I just want to acknowledge the point that Rep. Nixon made about the chilling effect. I represent the amazing District 42, and we are home to the City Beautiful, and we have drag shows in the City Beautiful, and I invite you all to join me for one because it would be fabulous. And so with that said, we have seen a chilling effect, Mr. Speaker, not just from this bill, but also from the executive branch with DBR, potentially taking away the liquor license from one of my local nonprofits. That's a historic nonprofit because of a drag show performance they hosted. And so just very concerned about the ripple effect. Even if the bill sponsor says here in this chamber that that's not what this bill is.
To lewd exposure of prosthetic or imitation genitals or breasts. What does that mean? And how can Floridians in everyday life be able to identify that, to understand what they are supposed to do with this bill?
Representative Fine.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize. I was flipping to the bill, so to get to the line, I did not hear the question. Would you mind repeating it?
Again, can you repeat your question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is in regards to lines 102 to 103. And do you have it just so that I can go forward, or do you need me to wait for a second?
Representative Fine, have you found that section?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm there. I was trying to flip to it when you were talking, so I didn't hear the question. But now I can see it, so please ask your question again.
Representative Gann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, now that we are both on the same page, can you define prosthetic or imitation genitals or breasts and explain how this is supposed to be identified by Floridians so that they would be in compliance with this bill if it were to pass?
Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the definitions are self-explanatory, and frankly, I think observing them would be as well.
Representative Bartleman, in questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I believe that as a parent, I should be able to take my child to a Broadway show. In your bill, it's very unclear, because if I'm just a Floridian who isn't watching this debate or does not understand the law, I recently went to
perceived by a community. It reflects the reality of your actions. Many of these vague bills that we're passing here, they are having negative impacts and chilling effects on communities, from book bans to prohibiting things like Ruby Bridges being taught in schools. And so that is the reason that I change the name on this bill. Also, as it relates to what Rep. Masulo stated, insulting, this bill insults an entire community, which is why I wanted to change that name. At the end of the day, the bill sponsor has said some very hurtful and insulting things to community members of the LGBTQ community, to members in the back rows, to me, myself. And so if we're going to talk about insults, we need to make sure we're calling it out.
Keep your comments to the issue, not the personality. Let me remind everybody on all sides of Rule 8.2A. Thank you. You can close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So again, if we really care about representing the entire state of Florida and ensuring that everyone has the right to live healthy, prosperous, and safe, you'll change the name of this bill so people know what it is. Thank you.
Having closed on the amendment, all in favor of the adoption of the amendment signify by saying yea. Opposed, no. Show the amendment fails. Read the next amendment.
Representative Cross offered the following amendment with title amendment, barcode 192001. Remove lines 42 through 59 and insert an amendment.
Representative Cross, you're recognized to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment seeks to improve the bill by striking the section related to government permitting of events. The right to peaceably assemble is one protected explicitly in the First Amendment, dictating to our local governments and government entities what they can and cannot permit will serve to limit who, when, where, how, or even whether people can assemble. Pride events are held across our nation in recognition of the fight for the most basic rights of LGBTQ plus individuals to exist. Indeed, there are more than 40 Pride events across our great state, drawing millions of attendees and bringing in millions of dollars into our local economies. LGBTQ plus persons have fought and won legal rights as well as societal recognition over the past decades. However, those rights are clearly still at risk, as we can see here today. Pride as an event is a statement that the fight for recognition is still ongoing and that there are those in America that seek to limit or demonize the LGBTQ plus community. Pride as an event and community celebration is as important as ever. Thank you.
Are there questions of the sponsor? Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Where are Pride events mentioned in the bill? Since that's the justification, again, for this amendment, a concern that Pride events wouldn't be able to peaceably assemble. Where in this bill do we talk about Pride events?
Representative Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is in anticipation of an event like Pride not being allowed to be permitted in its full capacity, allowing for the artistic freedom that we have seen at events across our state.
Representative Fine, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I've not been to a Pride event, but my question to you is, are you stating as a matter of your belief that all 40 of these Pride events would meet the adult live performance standard as laid out in this bill?
Representative Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that goes beyond the intent of this amendment. I've only attended several Pride events, but I know in St. Petersburg and my community, this is one of the most important events that we have each year, and we are concerned that this will limit free speech and the ability of people to assemble peacefully in these Pride events.
Representative Fine, any questions?
Thank you, and thank you for answering my question. I'd remind us it only deals with things over the age of 18. But you said there's an unfettered right to peaceably assemble. One of the things that drew me to do this bill was an event where streets were closed, where downtowns were closed. Do people have an unfettered right to just peaceably assemble wherever they want, in the middle of a street, on a bridge? They can just go wherever they want, or do cities have and counties have the right to regulate assemblies to make sure they're done with the safety of the public in mind?
And I would just note that if you know the answer to the question, let's keep the questions to the amendment itself. Additional questions on the amendment? Are there amendments to the amendment? Are there substitute amendments?
None on the desk. None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Are there substitute amendments?
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Is there debate? Representative Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those will be quick. I mean, what this amendment intends to do is to take out the part relating to public events that have adult live performances. If one were to think about it and you were to have to choose public versus private, at least in the private performance, it's theoretically closed in and people have a choice, which a choice I may not agree with, but at least that choice was made. Public performances, as happened in my community, is where they just do it in the middle of the street, and a parent walking their child to the library or the post office or a restaurant all of a sudden gets to walk by something that would be defined as an adult live performance. This is the most important part, I believe, of this bill, that this be included, and that's why I ask you to vote down this amendment.
Representative Rainer Goolsbee in debate.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Members, first off, Representative Cross, thank you so much for this amendment. You and I are both from St. Petersburg, and we also understand that St. Pete has a Pride event that's actually one of the largest in the country. I would say this, Pride, and I know there have been members who have called for my community to be erased. That was actually the words that were used. Pride actually allows people to be seen. It allows people to be exposed to all sorts of different people. There are drag performances at Pride events, at a Pride parade where people can choose to go to, and that happened to be outside. Also, I know that Pride for my community, it brings in multiple millions of dollars a year. So if Pride was chilled or stopped in any way, it would actually cause an economic constraint and impact. Thank you so much. Economic impact to my city. So for those who may not care if I'm erased, maybe you care if the economy that we have in the state of Florida that is based on Pride would actually be negatively impacted. I ask that you vote up on this amendment.
Is there additional debate? Seeing none, Representative Black in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure where we started talking about Pride parades. I think the sponsor has made it very clear that that's not mentioned in the bill. What is covered in the bill, and what is key here, is that we're talking about a specific test that he's included that covers prurient, shameful material that is patently offensive to the prevailing standards in the adult community. The sponsors of this amendment and those who support it, it would seem, believe that Pride events meet that test. If you believe that that's true, then perhaps this problem is more pervasive than we imagine. And perhaps it's altogether the reason for, or one of the key reasons, for bringing forth the bill in the first place that spawned this amendment. But clearly, this is not directly addressed in the bill. This is either a red herring or you are condemning Pride parades. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Harris in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the sponsor for bringing this good amendment, because clearly a lot of these bills are not clear. And so in order to make sure that we are protecting certain events like Pride, who, by the way, most Pride organizers, in fact, the Prides that I go to, they do have permits from their city and county entities. It makes it very clear that we are not targeting them, because it is not clear in the language of the bill. If it were, this amendment wouldn't be here. So I would like to thank you for clarifying and making things more clear, and for making sure that these incredible events who bring a lot of money and bring people out and have a good time are protected. Thank you.
Representative Escamani, we got 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to be clear that state standard is not well defined, and other states don't do it this way. So if North Florida doesn't think a Pride parade is acceptable, then Orlando is going to be impacted. That's our concern with the vagueness of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further debate. You got 26 seconds. Representative, you've already debated, so any further debate? Further debate. Seeing none, you recognize to close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that you all vote up on this amendment today to protect Pride as important celebrations that bring people together, support local economies, and create inclusivity and acceptance. As the bill's speaker alluded to, parents still need to have the choice whether or not to take their minor children to these type of events. This simply make sure that Tallahassee is not the arbiter of what local communities can invite and permit within their areas. I ask that you help protect the First Amendment, protect the right of people to assemble and to express themselves. Please protect our brothers, sisters, sons, and daughters, our family, and our neighbors in the LGBTQ+ community, and join me in voting yes on this amendment.
Having closed the amendment, all those in favor say yay. Opposed, no? No. Show the amendment fails. Read the next amendment.
Representative Harris offered the following amendment, barcode 197071, between lines 111 and 112. Insert an amendment.
Representative Harris, you're recognized to explain your amendment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. So my amendment clarifies that a show, exhibition, or other presentation cannot qualify as an adult live performance for the purpose of the bill simply because it includes drag performers. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the amendment.
Are there questions of the sponsor? Representative Roach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm reading the language, and it says, it doesn't say, at least the definition that I have, it doesn't say drag. It says, due to a performer's impersonation of a sex other than their assigned sex at birth. My first question is, how do you define impersonation of a sex? What does that mean?
Representative Harris.
It's a performance, but drag literally is dressed as opposite sex. So, I mean, I think that kind of is an explanation of the amendment.
Representative Roach, follow up.
So by using the term impersonation, that lends me to believe that the person is actually not what they're impersonating, right? If you're impersonating a woman, that means by definition you are not a woman. Is that your understanding?
Representative Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Drag is a performance where you dress up as someone of the opposite. So if I was to dress in drag, I would be a drag king. But you could also, there are people, but to clarify, there are people who are women who dress up in drag as women as well. What I want to make sure is that there is not a specific targeting of drag performers for the sake of targeting drag performers, because dressing up in drag in and of itself is not sexual. It's just drag.
Representative Roach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I'm trying to clarify is you keep using the term drag. That's not in the bill. It says impersonation. And how do you distinguish between a person that's impersonating a woman and a person that is a woman? That's my question. And the bill further says, other than the performer's sex assigned at birth, how are you going to determine their sex assigned at birth? Are you going to ask them to expose themselves?
Representative Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's outside the scope.
Hold on. Representative Roach, you're recognized for a follow-up question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The language of the bill says impersonation of a sex other than the performer's sex assigned at birth. What we're doing here is passing a law. If this becomes the law and I vote up on your amendment, how do we know if the law is being violated or not? How are you going to instruct people to determine the performer's sex assigned at birth, and how are you going to tell them what is the difference between impersonating a woman and being a woman?
Representative Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe we can reference the bathroom bill.
Additional questions? Additional questions of the sponsor? Representative Andrade, questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Representative Harris, your amendment and your description of the amendment continues to use the word dressing up, wearing clothes. But the amendment is addressing a section of the bill discussing nudity, sexual conduct, and the exposure of genitals. My question is, if you're concerned about people putting on clothes, and that's the need for your amendment, why did you put it in this section of the bill?
Representative Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's where the drafters put it, and I wanted to clarify that we exclude drag simply for the sake of drag.
Representative Andrade.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Representative Harris, are you concerned at all that anyone in the state interpreting this statute would think that wearing clothes is the same as exposing their genitals or engaging in simulated sex activity or being nude?
Representative Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I'm concerned about is the chilling effect of the bill, and I want to ensure that performances that are drag performances won't be targeted because they are drag performances, and that is the amendment.
Representative Fine, any questions?
Thank you. And I think sometimes, we need to understand not what the intent of amendments are, but what amendments would actually do. This bill defines an adult live performance, among other things, of, someone sort of getting naked and engaging in sort of sexual activity. If I read your amendment correctly, given where you've put it, it would exempt from any of this someone who is impersonating a sex other than the performer's sex assigned at birth. So is it your intent that if you are impersonating a sex other than what you are, you should be able to do any of the things in this bill that it defines adult live performances?
Representative Harris. And we're about out of time, so this will be the last question. Go ahead and answer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, that is not my intent, and I welcome an amendment to clarify it. The intent is to not define drag under those terms simply because it is drag.
Time having expired for questions, are there amendments to the amendment?
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Are there substitute amendments?
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Is there debate? Representative Fine, in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment should be voted down for two reasons. Number one, the bill does not define drag. As I've read multiple times, it gives a clear, almost 20-line definition. I share Representative Black's concern about why people are reading things into this. What it does is it says, well, maybe they think that it is. I don't know. I'm not saying that. But the other reason this should not be done is, while it's just perhaps poor drafting, and what I would recommend is you withdraw it, it would create a pass for anyone to do any of these things, which I think all of us would think are not okay if you just impersonate the other sex. You now get a get out of jail free card to basically do anything you want in front of children. I don't think that's your intent. We can vote it down, or you can say oops and withdraw it, but whether you do that or not, we absolutely need to vote this down.
Further debate. Representative Bartleman, in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to point out that last week we argued about a bill that I know it was not this legislature's intent to have books with African American people in them removed from shelves, including Ruby Bridges and all the other books I cited, but that is what the public did and used. So what this amendment does, it just provides clarifying language so that we are all clear. You don't want the people out there who are homophobic and mean, just like the racists are using the book ban. I mean, we don't want that to happen. So this just clarifies that so that we're okay and it's clear. So I would urge everyone to support this amendment.
Further debate. Representative Black, in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems clear from this conversation, and I'm echoing the bill's sponsor with this, that the other side seems to believe that pride parades engage in behavior that's specifically prohibited under this bill, such as matters pertaining to nudity, sexual conduct, sexual excitement, and patently lewd or offensive behavior. Look, if this is true, I'll restate it again. I've said it before. The impetus for the creation of the bill that spawned this amendment was all about stopping what we all know to be rampant sexualization of our children. Even the other side now implicitly admits it. And the sexualization of our children is wrong. I'll go back to the opening statement from Representative Fine. Today, we fight evil. This is evil. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Escamani, in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to acknowledge that nothing happens in a vacuum. So as we're debating this bill and providing these amendments, LGBTQ plus people are being called groomers. Walt Disney World has been called a grooming organization. You cannot ignore the facts that surround us. And so our concerns are legitimate. Innocent LGBTQ plus people who are just living their best lives the way that all of us want to are being accused of things that is not accurate. So we're dealing with that atmosphere, that environment. So these type of amendments are important because the chilling effect has already happened and people are feeling like they can't be themselves. Nothing about their behavior is deviant to me, but candidly, for some people in this room, they think it is. Speaker, but Mr. Speaker, there's, that's not our job to
The other side seems to believe.
School. So to help
organization in all of our communities, I'd like to recognize Governor Michael Kestis, Governor Jeffrey Michaelman, Governor Dan Sluger, Governor Neil Snyder, Governor Andres Goyens, Governor Deborah Meagan, Governor Buck Boisel, Governor Troy Wiggum, and Governor-elect Don Harris in the East Gallery. Thank you so much for all you do.
Members, before we begin, I'll just reiterate that I know there's a lot of strong feelings on this bill and the amendments pertaining to the bill. I've heard a little too much sarcasm and personal innuendo on both sides, and so let's just try to bring it down a level. And with that, Representative Escamani, you're recognized to present your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that reminder. Okay, members, so I filed this amendment in committee before too, and I'm just bringing it back again for your consideration. And basically, it reflects what is the standard for other types of experiences in statute, where basically, as long as a parent accompanies that minor, then they're basically not going to be in trouble. The venue won't be criminalized, the parent won't be criminalized, and really, this is my attempt to offer a good grace amendment because, again, in this state, we have had a track record of listening to parents, of trusting parents. We have situations where a parent's kid is performing in a drag pageant. That happened in my district where we had to relocate this event, Mr. Speaker, because part of the performers are people who are 16, 17 years old. They're close to adult, but the venues were hesitant to host them because of DBBR's actions in other venues. And now it's creating a chilling effect where for some of our LGBTQ plus youth who perform in drag shows and they find it as an experience that supports who they are, they build a community out of that, nothing is deviant about it, but we are concerned that because of this wide-reaching state standard redefinition of the Miller test, which we don't have precedent for, we don't have other examples to recall anyways, that this will have a chilling effect on young LGBTQ plus people who, again, their parent, maybe their older siblings in a show, and they just want to see them perform in a show. And so the point is to restore that parents' rights component that I know many of my colleagues love to talk about, and be thoughtful to just the uniqueness and nuance of all of our families here in the state of Florida. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. We're now in questions on the amendment. Representative Jacques in questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Escamani, what is an adult live performance?
Representative Escamani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's not defined in my amendment, but I will say, as you've heard from members in the back row, the definition that we're using, we're very concerned of the chilling effect, and its application already seen under agencies like DBBR, who have leveraged their authority to go after events that, again, for parents in Orlando, they think is fine, but maybe if there's parents, in a more conservative part of the state, they don't like. And so though that's not defined in my amendment, we are concerned the definition in the bill is incredibly broad and could have these unintended consequences that we've been trying to address here in the back rows.
Representative Jacques, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative, do you think sexually explicit shows are appropriate for children?
Representative Escamani.